and her sister. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. These are, without a doubt, some of my favorite words in all the Gospels. Why did Jesus love this family so much? Nowhere else in the Gospels does it say that Jesus loved anybody, not the apostles, not Peter, not even his own mother. Why these three? So the Gospel of John fleshes out stories in ways that the other Gospels don't, but never enough to satisfy our curiosity. So I always had a lot of questions about the characters in the story. How old were Mary and Martha and Lazarus? Life expectancy 2,000 years ago was appallingly low. People got married in their teens, so anyone who reached the ripe old age of 33 was really middle-aged and not young. So were Mary and Martha and Lazarus, were they married? Did their spouses die? Or were spousal relationships just not that important in Jesus's new vision of the new kingdom? Did they have children? Had Lazarus always been ill? Or did he acquire some infectious disease that killed him in a couple of days? Perhaps he had appendicitis or stepped on a rusty nail. Death was a frequent and unwelcome visitor in ancient villages. His sisters probably knew from hard experience that their brother was sick unto death, which is why they sent for their friend. Martha and Mary were obviously devastated by their brother's illness and death. They were equally distressed over Jesus' failure to arrive in time to save him. At the height of their grief, Martha said so very politely, "Lord, had you been here, my brother would not have died." Her sister, this story was not told in today's gospel, her sister stayed back at the house as Jesus approached them, probably because she didn't trust herself to meet with Jesus. I always like to think that people in Scripture are much better behaved than I, who would have yelled at Jesus, "So what kind of friend are you? All those times you ate and drank at my house and you took your sweet old time getting here? Had you arrived in time, my brother would have lived. I am so mad at you." The grief in this story is palpable. My friend Mary and I spent an afternoon together this week, and somehow our conversation landed upon the topic of family trauma. Mary is the second youngest of 9 children, and her oldest brother died from a heart ailment when he was 6. The event plunged the family into a grief from which they would never recover. Neither parent ever spoke about their grief because it was just too painful. In fact, Mary, who was not even born when her brother died, never saw a picture of him till she was in her 20s. Her parents, like my parents and probably your parents if you're of a certain age, were told, "Buck up. Forget about the dear ones you lost. Just get over it." Remember those stories? It was God's will, or the worst thing I ever heard in my life, God just needed another angel. The prevailing prescription for handling grief was out of sight, out of mind. But of course, Mary's parents never forgot their little boy, and they never stopped loving him or mourning him. Not talking about him and their bottomless grief made it so much worse for everyone. And so grief is an unwelcome guest who barges through the doors of our lives, unbidden and unwelcome, and violently rearranges the furniture in ways that we do not recognize. It breaks our hearts into a million pieces. Over the years, the pieces might reassemble themselves into some sort of order, but the edges are never again straight, and their unevenness rubs against the tender parts, the parts that can never let go. Through what the Greek playwright Aeschylus called the awful mercy of God, The survivors go on, but when the grief-stricken touch their hearts, it always rebounds with pain. I've heard homilies over the years where the tardiness of Jesus gets explained away. Jesus' incomprehensible dawdling was necessary because Lazarus had to die so that Jesus could perform a great miracle like Elijah did in raising a person from the dead. Those who followed Jesus needed a miracle in order to believe. Later believers needed miracles in order to believe. But such behavior sounds pretty cruel to me. Does it sound that way to you? What friend, what good friend, what loving friend would engage in such behavior? What kind of a person would use a friend's death to teach a lesson or to prove a point to attract disciples? And what lesson would that be? Who would attribute such behavior to a loving God? And my friends, you know that God never expects any human being to die in order to benefit other human beings or to promote the divine agenda. That would be called human sacrifice. And so if we divest this story of its preachiness and miracles, we can see it for what it is, a profound story about friendship and love and grief, and even anger, dressed unattractively in bad theology. Martha and Mary loved their brother Lazarus, and Jesus loved them. The three of them were in deep, heart-rending grief over the passing of Lazarus, and the only thing that could assuage their grief was the return of Lazarus from the dead. My good friend Marguerite Sexton tragically lost her oldest son to suicide on Christmas Day in 2015. Marge, of course, was devastated beyond description, and as therapy for herself and for those who share this terrible experience, she started up and continues to run a support group for mothers who lose their children. She once described an accidental meeting with a woman in Trader Joe's over a six-pack of ginger beer. Just by happenstance, a woman asked Marge if the ginger beer tasted good. Marge, who tells everyone that she is not the least bit shy about sharing painful experiences, explained to the woman that she was buying the beer for her son, who was 7 years into recovery. The woman blurted out that her beloved daughter had recently died of a heroin overdose. And she told Marge how she lay next to her comatose daughter for 2 days, telling her repeatedly how much she loved her. And Marge told her about her other son, Ron, who was taken by suicide. The woman asked Marge if she believed in the resurrection of the dead, which Marge understood to be more existential than theological. And to paraphrase her response, to have a child, a parent, a spouse, or a loved one on the other side means that we never again have to fear death. When we close our eyes, we will open them to see our loved one, that is, God, looking into ours with the divine arms ready to receive us. From the depths of her own terrible grief, Marge was able to comfort the newly bereaved woman. And God was right there in that interaction over ginger beer in Trader Joe's, as God is present in all interactions, tending the wound that never seems to heal, helping the grief-stricken to find their way out of the raw hell into which they descended when their loved one died. So I don't know what happens to any of us when we die. No one does. But I do know that we don't go alone. My grandmother said that her mother was waiting to accompany her the day before she died. My uncle appeared to me in a dream and told me that he was going to take care of my father, his namesake, 2 days before my father died. 6 months after my brother's death, he knocked on my sister's door in a dream to tell her not to worry about him because he was doing just fine in his new place of residence. Why did Marge meet that bereaved woman over ginger beer? Was it all a coincidence? Or was it God, pressed down and overflowing into both of their laps? The God who sends sustenance during the broken down episodes of our lives in the most unusual ways. Not only did God send Marge to that heartbroken woman, Marge was God at that moment. And so, my friends, this I know, bad things will happen and people will die. And the good news is that through it all, God really is there, in the living, in the dying, and in the rising, just as God was there when Lazarus died.